Hi, welcome to the Quakes Motel. My name's Conan. In today's video, we're going to look at the various ways that you can transfer your tracks from your MPC to your DAW. Now, obviously, you can do some of your mixing in your MPC. You can actually do all of your mixing in your MPC, but there are a lot more options open to you if you transfer your files into your DAW and finish off your track on that platform. Let's jump in. Now, I just want to go over some terminology quickly. Stems, multis, tracks, etc. I see a lot of misinformation about this online, and what I want to do is I just want to make clear the language that I use. Now, I don't mind, you can call them stems, multis, you can call them whatever you want. It's just semantics, there's no wrong or right. But the language that I use and I will be using in this video, and if you're going to be dealing with mix engineers, mastering engineers, it will tend to be the language that they will use as well. So we'll start with stems. Stems is the word which I quite often hear being used for multi-tracks, but stems really actually means groups of instruments. As a mastering engineer, I quite often do stem mastering. So for instance, that would be the drum stem would be all of your drums: kick, snare, hats, overheads, room, etc. Backing vocals all stacked together, that would be the backing vocal stems. And then I will quite often, well, let's say for instance for stem mastering, I will have drums, vocals, bass, and then quite often a track just called other, which will be guitars, synths, strings, etc., that kind of thing. Multis, multi-tracks, would be each individual element. So for your drums, that would be a single track for kick, single track for snare, a single track for hats, single track for cymbals, for toms, single track for your overheads maybe, that kind of thing. And it would be different synths, different basses. Your vocals would be each individual track. That would be multis, multi-tracks, or just tracks. So that's the language that I will be using, and like I said, you can call them whatever you like, but that's just the language that I'll be using when I refer to stems and multi-tracks or just multis. So kicking off, there's several ways where I will transfer my tracks from my MPC into my DAW for further mixing or arrangement. Now we'll start off with the old school way. This is the way that we used to do it before we had options, and that is literally recording in real time from your MPC, either the stereo outs or your individual outs, into your DAW, or at that time onto tape. So there's a few disadvantages and a few advantages of doing it this way. Disadvantages are obviously it takes a long time. You have to record each individual track. If you have multiple outs, for instance on the MPC X, or you've got a legacy MPC, then you can do it quicker. But if you've got something like the One, you can just really only do the stereo out, or the Live has a couple of outputs. But it takes time. Now, me personally, I don't actually mind that. It was what I was brought up on. With that time gives you a bit of time to reflect. You can absolutely make sure that the levels are right. You can assess the tracks going into your DAW or onto tape. So for me, that disadvantage of time wasn't really actually a disadvantage. I actually quite enjoyed the process, to be honest. And I started as a tape op as well, so it's kind of what I did. The advantages to it are that you can capture a sound. When you're recording real time out of your MPC, that digital analog converter will create a sound that can then go into a mixing desk or into a separate compressor or EQ or some effects. A lot of people run through the SP404 Mark II, for instance, or SP303, etc., and you'll be able to add your sound in real time. So if you're using outboard equipment, this will be the best way, if not the only way, that you can actually do that. And each individual piece of equipment that you're using, from the digital analog converter on your MPC through all the equipment, is going to add an imprint, an individual character to that sound. So that's a really, really good way to really build up your sound if that's your thing. But also bear in mind that the analog to digital converters going into your computer will also add a sound. So, you know, I'm not saying that it necessarily means you have to have very, very expensive analog to digital converters or a really expensive interface, because you don't have to. It's all about imprinting your sound. So your sound could actually be, because you use the cheapest interface that there is, that's your sound. And, you know, that's really, if imprinting your sound by doing it using this process, if that's what you want to do, then that's what you should be thinking about. You're imprinting your own sound. It's not necessarily going to be about copying somebody else's sound, or why can't I get my beats to sound exactly like Pete Rock or Dilla, etc., etc. So, you know, maybe don't spend so much time chasing somebody else's sound, when really you should be thinking about imprinting your own sound, developing your own character. So that's the old school way of doing it, and like I said, the advantages are that you can have a lot more control over your own individual sound, rather than just basically dragging and dropping it and straight into your computer or onto an SD card. Okay, so the second way that I do it is where I bounce the individual tracks in the MPC and I save them on an SD card or a hard drive, etc. So this is quite an easy way of doing it. So I've got a drum beat just in here. Now this is all just on one track, this drum beat. So as you can hear, there's three elements there: kick drum, snare, clap and a hi-hat, and they're all on the same track basically. So the way that you would do this is, if you go into save, it gives you the option of audio mixdown, and then you have this screen come up. And basically it's very, very simple. Starting from the top down, you would choose which bars you want to bounce to your files. You can add a tail on the end, and this is useful if you've got reverb or delays, etc., or effects on there. I think by default it's set to 1 second. I tend to have it set to 1 second because I don't tend to add a lot of long delays, etc., in the MPC. Then you have render source options. So this would be your stereo out 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. Now these are all on the MPC One, but you can't actually use any of these at all because you only have 1 and 2 as a stereo output. You have submixes as well. Now obviously this is different if you're using an MPC X, but I will leave that on out 1 and 2, and I do on my Live 2 as well, and if I had an MPC X I probably would as well, to be honest. Or you can change it to separate programs, or you can change it to explode tracks. Now what explode tracks does is it gives you a separate file for each track that you've got on your MPC. So in this case I would have this track here, but it would bounce it as a stem basically, because I have the kick, the snare, the kick, the clap and the hi-hat just on one track. So if I was to go save audio mixdown now, explode tracks, the file that I would end up with would be a stem of the kick, the hat and the clap. Also, if I had any effects added, for instance on the clap, I have that set to as a return effect. Here I have that actually been sent to an air reverb in my returns. So if I want to save that return as its own separate track, so just the reverb, I would hit export returns. So that would give me the stem with the kick, the hat and the clap, and then a separate track with the reverb. Now if I've got say for instance on my clap I had air reverb on there just as an insert effect, then when I bounce the stem, in this case, it would have the reverb on the clap, and I can't separate that because that's an insert effect rather than a return effect. So if you want to bounce your stems or your multis completely dry and you've got insert effects, make sure you turn them off. Also, as I said, if you want to bounce them dry but you want to have the returns separately, make sure you have export returns ticked. If not, you can just bounce it wet with all the effects on it. So as I said, that would have been a stem if I did it that way, because when you bounce or you explode in the audio mixdown option, it's on a track by track basis. So think of it as if you want to bounce a stem of all your drums, you'd have all of them on the one track. Now if I wanted to bounce and save on my SD card and my USB drive individual tracks from that drum beat, now before I do the audio explode in the audio mixdown option, I have to actually explode the track. So here's my track. I've got 3 different elements on there. If I go into here and press explode, that will then mute the original track, which is the stem, and it will now give me 3 individual tracks. So it'll be the same thing, but this time It's on individual tracks. So then, if I now go into audio mixdown, when I go into explode tracks, it's going to give me each individual multi-track, not stem, each individual multi-track as a separate file. So let's say in this instance, I've exploded my tracks in the actual main window. I've got them on separate tracks. And now I'll go into save. I'll go into audio mixdown. I've set the amount of bars. I've added a tail. I have my return on there still. Let's say I want to have that as a separate channel altogether. So now I'll just get a channel, a multi-track rather, it gets confusing, that will just have the sound of the reverb of the clap, because that's the only thing that I've got sent to my return reverb. So if I bounce this now, I will have a separate track for a kick, a separate track for a hat, a separate track for my clap, and because I've got that ticked, a separate track for my clap's reverb. If I had that off, I would get the clap with the reverb on. Yeah, I think that's right. So you've got these options here. Then underneath you have file formats. There's a whole bunch to choose from, which is amazing. I always stick to WAV. Some people who use Macs might go for AIFFs, but I stick to a WAV. Here you can choose the bit depth. By default, I leave that on 24, but you can change it to 32 floating point, or you can change to 16 or 8. Don't know why you'd want to do that. 24 for me, 44.1. Some people will change that to 48. I think that's the highest. Oh no, it can actually go up. That's pretty impressive. Didn't realise that. I stick to 44 or 24. That's just how I do it. Then you go to export, and now you can choose where you're going to save it. So for instance, for me, I would have, this is where my projects are. I've got it in this folder. I save it in here. What I do is I make my own folder for the multis. So I would hit that. You then name the file, and let's say it's called, well, I've called it there, and then it will add the name of the actual file in the track. So for this case, it would bounce that. That would be at the start. And for each individual track, I'd have that and that, etc. So obviously in the way that I just described, you would save your files onto an SD card or a USB drive. You would then be able to plug that straight into your computer and drag and drop at will. You can also take your files obviously to different computers, different studios, etc. But the final way of doing it is to actually drag and drop your files from your MPC straight into your DAW via the MPC software, but you open the MPC software as a VST inside your DAW. So the way that you do that, initially you put your MPC into controller mode, which is menu, this MPC icon here, controller mode. Now obviously make sure that everything you've worked on is already saved, because when you go into controller mode it wipes everything. So I now have my DAW open. Now as far as I know, this process is the same in any DAW. I use Studio One, but I've also done this in Logic, Pro Tools and Ableton. I'm sure it's the same in other DAWs. So I have a track open, I have the MPC software open as a VST, I have my MPC in controller mode. It's all happy, my computer's linked up to it, everything. I know that doesn't always happen, but it's happened on this occasion. Everything's fine. I have the MPC software open, I have the project open. So now if I hit play in my DAW, it plays that 1 bar loop with the kick, the clap and the hi-hat. So if, simple as this, if I now hit this export audio, remember that at the moment I have all the drums on just one track. So this would be what I would call a drum stem, because it's multiple tracks grouped together. So I hit export audio and then I hold down on it and I drag that into my DAW. If I now play that back, you can now see the audio's in my DAW. And I've now bounced it as audio. However, let's just delete that. Let's say, for instance, that I wanted to have each individual instrument on there. I wanted the kick, the clap and the hi-hat separately. So what I need to do, if you remember from the process that I did earlier on, I'm looking at my MPC now, I'm controlling it, so that's why it's changing on here. What I need to do is I need to explode the tracks. So what's happened now is I have individual tracks with the kick, the clap and the hat on individual tracks. So if I go into each individual track now, here I have the kick, export audio. If I drop this into here, go into the next track, I have the clap, export audio, drop that into there. I now have the clap, and yes, you've guessed it, go to the next track and I have the hat, export audio, hold down, drag, drop, done. And let's just put these into solo. So now if I play, I've now bounced each individual multi-track into my DAW, as easy as that. Literally choose the track, there I have a selection of tracks, and hit the export audio, drag and drop. It's that easy. So there you have it. That's the ways that I transfer my files from my MPC into my DAW. There's no right or wrong way, that's just the ways that I do it. And you can do some mixing in your MPC first, or you can do all of your mixing in your MPC first if you want, and then you could just bounce stems or a stereo pre-master and then send that onto mastering, or send your stems onto stem mastering, or onto a mix engineer and they could mix the stems in their DAW, etc. There's various different ways of doing it. Like I said, there's no right or wrong way of doing it. But as I've said before in many of my videos, if you learn your tools inside out, then you know whilst you're going through the process of building a track, writing a track, etc. You know, am I going to need to drag these files into my DAW and mix them? For instance, the audio options in the MPC are not that great. So if I'm going to be adding a full vocal to this, I might need to drag the individual elements into my DAW and then record the vocals in my DAW and then process them there, or I can record my vocals in my MPC, but then I'm going to process them in my DAW using auto-tune or whatever advanced processing you might do in your DAW. So if you know your tools, you know what your DAW can do and you know what your MPC can do, then you're going to know whilst you're working what you need to do and at what point you need to do it, whether you need to transfer all your files or stems, etc., that kind of thing. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more mixing, mastering and MPC tutorials and reviews. This is the Crates Motel. My name's Conan. Till next time.